can never with those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually make the comers thereunto perfect. For then would they have not ceased to be offered, because that the worshippers once purged should have had no more conscience of sins. But in those sacrifices there is remembrance again made of the sins every year. For it is not possible the blood of bulls and goats, blood of bulls and of goats should take away sins. Wherefore, when he cometh into the world, he saith, Sacrifice and offering thou wouldest not, but a body hast thou prepared me. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin thou hast had no pleasure. Then said I, Lo, I come. In the volume of the book it is written of me, to do thy will, O God. Above when he said, Sacrifice and offering and burnt offerings and offering for sin thou wouldest not, neither hadst pleasure therein, which are offered by the law. Then said he, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first, that he may establish the second. By the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. And every priest standeth daily ministering, and offering oftentimes the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God, from henceforth expecting till his enemies be made his footstool. For by one offering he hath perfected forever them that are sanctified. Before we begin, let's look, Lord, in prayer. Father, we're thankful for the opportunity and the privilege we have to be here today, Lord. I ask now, Father, that you'd bless your word as I strive to preach and expound upon it. I pray, Lord, that your Spirit would empower it and use it, Father, in a way that only you can. We ask, Lord, that you'd meet with us today, as it is our greatest need. And Father, I know that we can't do anything to conjure up any kind of a blessing here today. But Father, we're dependent on your mercy, that you would be pleased, Father, to bless us as we're assembled. Bless your word, Lord. Use it to captivate our hearts, our minds, and our affections. Use it to make us more like your Son. And most of all, dear God, according to thy will, I pray to use it to save the lost here this morning. We ask all these things in the name of your precious Son. Amen. Thank you. You all can be seated. We find ourselves, our main text for this morning in Hebrews chapter 10 will be between verses 11 through verse number 14. I gave you all a heads up when we started this chapter that the topic or the thought it runs all the way from verse 1 all the way down to verse number 18. But because of all the details and the density of this passage, we're breaking it up and looking at the different parts. And it's my hope and my prayer that when we have examined all the parts, we can look at it as a whole and fully or more fully appreciate the point that the writer is making. Now, in our text for today, the one thought, in a sense, this is the crescendo of the arguments, with the thoughts before this leading up to this point, and then the thought after this in verse 15 proves the point from a historical or from an Old Testament perspective. Now, the main theme in this passage is one he's already expounded on for different reasons, but right now it's in regards to the repetitive nature, or maybe better put, the repetitive necessity of sacrifices under the Old Testament. As I was chewing on this passage, what occurred to me is that in the Jewish mindset, and I know I've touched on this, so bear with me, but in the Jewish mindset, it was somewhat of a fundamental necessity to repeat those sacrifices, which appeals to us reasonably. What I mean by that is, for instance, I wish I could take one shower and never shower again. I'm not into bathing, and some of you say, well, you need to be into bathing, and so I still do bathe periodically. But it's one of those things I wish I didn't have to do again, right? I don't like brushing my teeth, and so when my teeth fall out or replace them, I look forward to that. I don't have to brush those. I'm kidding. But we understand that life is somewhat defined by the repetitions that are necessary, and this is true in all areas of life. If it's in regards to your health, a consistent Consistency is the key for a good diet and exercise. Similarly, you can't go exercise once a year and call it good. You have to do it on a regular basis. You have to eat healthy periodically. Now, peanut butter is good for you every now and then. I'm kidding. I'm teasing Mr. Ron about that. You want to do it on a consistent basis because that's how life is. I've heard, I didn't verify it, but I've heard that you have to do something for 10,000 hours before you become an expert in that thing. I'm working my way quick to sleeping. I'm getting really good at it. And again, consistency and repetition, that's what's needed to become better in that field. I've shared half jokingly before, actually, my sister, growing up, we took probably the same amount of years in regards to piano lessons, but because she did it more often than I did, she is still better at it than I am. Is at least what everyone thinks. I don't think that. I'm just kidding. But what's going on? What's the difference? What's the repetition of said thing? Now, in regards to our moral stance, we apply that same logic because for a while or for an aspect of it, it's true. If I say I'm a good person and I help one old lady cross the street, and I've done that once in my life, and I go live like the devil, am I a good person? Absolutely not. Helping one old lady cross the street, if that's even still a thing, it doesn't cancel out me robbing a bank. To be good morally, you have to live a life of consistent goodness, if you will. Now, there's a sense in which this was also true, and it was rightly true, of the Old Testament sacrifices. The idea, to simply put it this morning, was that in the Old Testament, if you're guilty of a specific sin, you've done something wrong, and to be honest, there's a lot of sacrifices for a lot of sins. People say the God of the Old Testament is not merciful. I would strongly disagree. If you're guilty of a sin, you would bring the proper sacrifice to atone for that specific sin. And like bathing or brushing your teeth, if you get morally filthy again, you bring the sacrifice again to atone for the same sin or for another sin. And so in the Jewish mind, similar to our mind, just not in a religious sense, one of the fundamental aspects of their religion or their maybe worldview is a little more accurate, is the repetition of sacrifices. You had to go and bring it again and again and again and again. We'll circle back to this toward the end of the sermon, but we treat modern religion in the same way. How many times, and you fill in the blank, how many times do we force ourselves to read our Bible? Do we force ourselves to pray? How many times do we come back to church because we're feeling guilty and, man, it's a bad week, I really should be in church. Now, I'm thankful that all of us are here, don't get me wrong. But we apply the same logic the Jews had. Well, I'm now more morally filthy, and I need to repeat this ritual to cleanse myself again. That was so rooted in the mindset of the Jews that arguably the writer of Hebrews gives them this book to completely undo that mindset. To look at this topic as a whole, which is why we read the first 14 verses, if I could summarize what we've already studied for the sake of a bigger picture, in verses 1 through 4, the writer makes it clear, and he kind of appeals to what they would have known deep inside of them, that those sacrifices could never take away sins. You could offer 1,000 lambs and 1,000 bullocks and 1,000 rams, and that would never ultimately take away your sin, because as soon as you sinned the 1,001st time, you had to bring your 1,001st sacrifice. And so he points out the foundational principle that no, those sacrifices could never, ever, ever take away sin. Well, in the second part of this conversation, or the second part of this argument, if you will, he lays a little bit of groundwork. And instead of jumping all the way to verse 11, which again is kind of the main point in all this, he first clarifies that in God's design, what was at work to take away sin was not another sacrifice that was a little better in quality, but it was a completely different sacrifice altogether. That sacrifice involved the Son of God becoming a man and giving his life for us. And so in the second part of this argument that the writer is formulating for us, he reminds us that even in the Old Testament, God's grand plan was that the second person of the Trinity would become a person with the explicit purpose of being our sacrifice. Therefore, he opens up with the words in verse 5, when he cometh into the world, the one who is going to do away with our sin, the anointed one, the Messiah, when he came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering thou wouldest not, because those couldn't take away sin, but a body thou hast prepared me. And so the writer is laying this foundational point that the means by which sin would be taken away was not by a repetition of those same sacrifices, which could never take away sin, but it was through the incarnation of God himself, by God becoming a man. And so now that brings us to the main point in verse number 11. Now, he opens up, really, this entire text is actually full of contrast. So you'll notice here, the first major point of contrast is the Old Testament, all right? So he says in verse 11, and every priest, we've studied the priesthood pretty densely in the previous chapters, every priest standeth daily ministering and offering oftentimes the same sacrifices. The idea here, he reminds them that day in and day out, those priests, they never sat, they never rested unless their shift was over. The entire time they're in the temple, he says there, they standeth daily ministering and offering, oftentimes, many times, the same sacrifices. It was the same thing over and over and over and over again. And he says there in verse 11, he repeats the original premise, which can never take away sins. It can never do so. My dad used to do body work, body work on cars, auto body work on cars. Before the ministry, and so now to this day, he will do it as a hobby or to make some money here and there. And there's a lot of crazy chemicals that go on with auto body work, and there'll be different times, different paints or primers will get on your skin, and water just will not remove it. I mean, maybe you can scrub and scrub, but at that point, you're not removing that paint or primer. You're actually removing the skin beneath that paint and primer, and that's how it comes off. Now, the point is that you can bathe and bathe and bathe and bathe and bathe and bathe and bathe all you want, but water and soap will never cut those chemicals. They will never remove those chemicals. And you can do it over again, but it simply will not remove it. What they're doing in this sense is futile work. They're offering the same sacrifices over and over and over again. But those sacrifices, like I said, as established in verse 4, those sacrifices can never take away sin. I mean, can you imagine if I came to church covered in paint or primer and say, and I tell you, well, I've got, I don't even know what soap I use. It's a peanut butter-based soap. I'm just kidding. I've got this soap and I've got Dawn dish soap that wouldn't remove it, but maybe I'll try it again. And I come back out and, well, maybe I'll try it again. And maybe I'll try it again. After the 100th time, you say, Brother Josiah, just stop trying. It's not really worth it because it's just not working. Well, the priests are in the temple trying, well, I shouldn't say trying because they were being obedient, but they're offering the same sacrifice over and over and over and over and over and over again. But those sacrifices could never take away their sin. Therefore, they were standing doing the job over and over and over and over again. So notice what he says in verse number 12. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God. Now, the imagery of Christ sitting at the right hand, that's contrasted with the priest that standeth daily. It is my understanding, and I'm not entirely clear on all the ins and outs of it, but it is my understanding that in the Jewish culture, especially in regards to religious service, You did not sit until the job was done. Similarly, in our culture, but it's not necessarily a hard, fast legal rule, of course. But in our culture, if you're working, you don't sit down. And people, I mean, growing up, I'd get picked on if I sat down in the middle of a job. They would very kindly ask me, "Well, are you done for the day? Did you finish your work?" And no, of course, I just want to sit down. Well, Jesus, because the job is complete, he sits at the right hand of God. His sacrifice has been sufficient, which we'll come to in just a moment. The job that he did is completely finished, in contrast to the job of the priest, which could never be finished. Now notice the details, though, of verse number 11. I don't like wearing glasses, that's why I hold them when I preach, but the problem is when I hold them when I preach, I spit all over them. So now I'm just looking at spit instead of different people here. So in verse 11, I like what he says there. He says, which can never take away sins, but this man. Now that's a powerful reminder because the writer of Hebrews, he obviously knows and has preached and proclaimed that it is the Son of God who became man, the Son of God incarnate, the Son of God, that eternal spiritual being, put on a robe of flesh. But what he wants to remind the readers, what he wants to remind the hearers, is that it is a man through which we are saved. It is not some distant, impersonal God. It is not some being out there who cannot sympathize with us. It is not some being out there who has abstractly put up the sense or the I can't think of the word, the standard of justice. He's reminding us it is this man through which we're saved. It is this man. I would simply say that it is a reminder, dear Christian, that the foundation of the Christian faith is a man and not anything else. On a side note, it is part of why I believe in Christianity, because the foundation of our belief system, it's not a worldview that someone has eloquently put together. It's not some argument that someone formed several thousand years ago that is convincing enough. No, the very foundation of the Christian faith is a person and not merely their ideas. I chased too many rabbits in Sunday school this morning, so I didn't really get to it. But you understand that by the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, those confirm the truth of that man. Every other religion was started by a person, and that person died. I'm not saying they didn't have good ideas. I'm not even saying your life wouldn't be better if you adhered to those ideas. But ultimately speaking, those people died because those ideas could never really save them. But when the Son of God became a man and he preached what he preached and he taught what he taught, everything from the most basic moral command all the way to the deep, grand, glorious truths of theology, every single one of them is true. And what's confirmed it is his death, burial, and resurrection. What I'm getting at, it is this man through which we're saved. But this man, the writer says, he says in verse 12 again, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever. Now again, the main point that he's been trying to get into the Jews' mind is that Jesus, now, forgive me, it's such a broad, I can't get my thoughts organized. The superiority of Jesus Christ has already been explained in every other area. So it's a superior covenant, which is the main point between chapter 8 and chapters 8 and 9. He's a superior priest in chapter 6 and chapter 7, you understand. It's a superior work back in chapter 2. It's a superior rest or a superior promise. Go to chapter 4. All of these things are superior, but in the Jewish mind, the linchpin for the greatness of the covenant was the sacrifice. Think about it. God could promise Abraham and Moses and in turn the rest of the children of Israel the land that flows with milk and honey. God can make all these powerful and wonderful promises, But if the proper sacrifice was not given, it was null and void. You understand? And so, while everything else could remain the same, if this right sacrifice was not given, then you missed it. We took Lena to the aquarium for her birthday a month ago or whenever that was. And tickets you get so expensive, it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, those fish don't need any more money. Why do they charge more for tickets? But can you imagine if to put things kind of in an abstract sense, if I said, well, we want to go have fun, we want to be entertained, we want to be amused. I'm going to buy a ticket for the Newport Aquarium, and because it's cheaper than the Kings Island ticket, I'm going to use that ticket to get into Kings Island. It wouldn't work. Abstractly speaking, do they provide the same things? Yes. They both amuse you. They both entertain you. They both fill your time, right? But if you do not have that one detail, if that one detail is off, then none of it applies. You can't get into either place. You can't use a Kings Island ticket to get in the aquarium. You can't use an aquarium ticket to get into Kings Island. It's that one thing. And so the writer said, we have a superior priest. We have a superior covenant. Everything about this New Testament is better in every way. And in the Jewish mind, it would seem they thought, well, because everything else is superior, all he has to do is give the same sacrifice. But what he's telling us in verse number 12 is that this man offered only one sacrifice. And this one sacrifice, like everything else, is superior to all the other sacrifices that were ever given. What was the sacrifice? We've already established that between verses 5 through 10. The sacrifice was himself. Because of the superior nature of this man's sacrifice, he says in verse 12, after he had offered one sacrifice, though it's a sacrifice offered for sins forever. We don't have to go back tomorrow. We don't have to come back next week. There's no new sacrifice when we enter into glory. This one man has offered this one sacrifice, and this sacrifice is good enough for eternity. It's good enough. It's not, the whole system is not better just because there's a better covenant. The whole system is not better just because there's a better priest. The whole system is better because the sacrifice is better than every other sacrifice given before. So he says in verse 12, but this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, as we noted, sat down on the right hand of God. Now, verse 13, he says, from henceforth, expecting till his enemies be made his footstool. Now, this is I don't know if it's a direct quote per se, but it's an allusion to Psalms 110, verse 1 and 2, I believe. Now, what's interesting about this is that there's a sense in which he is sat down at the right hand of God, and that's point A. Point B is from henceforth, sitting at the right hand of God, expecting till his enemies be made his footstool. That's point B. So what the writer seems to be doing here, he is saying is that this one sacrifice is sufficient from one end of eternity, if you will, all the way to the other end of eternity. The phrase in verse 13 is a phrase that is used to point to the second coming of Jesus. You see, right now, his enemies are not yet made his footstool. Right now, indeed, he's already king, but his reign is not yet in full effect, if you will. Right now, there is still wickedness in high places. Right now, there is still equality, biblically speaking. There is still inequity, biblically speaking. There is injustice everywhere. Right now, these things are not yet under his feet. But the day is coming, the future day is coming, which in the Jewish mind was of utmost importance because of all the prophets who talked about it, that the day would come when everything would be subdued and placed under the feet of Jesus. The point being, by this one sacrifice, all of these things are dealt with. Some of which we still wait for, but it is all dealt with. I think of, and we'll touch on this a little bit later this afternoon, Lord willing, but I think of the grand scheme of all that is involved in the gospel. The curse of the earth. And I've said before, it is unfair that because of our obedience, the rest of creation suffers. Not the rest of creation sinned against God, just us. We think of wicked governments that are in place. And I remember in grade school, just from a few years ago, I'm just kidding, I'm a little older than that. I remember learning when even the first and second grade that our founding fathers, they acknowledged that there is no perfect system and that at some point every system would eventually become corrupt, but they did their best in the designing of the Constitution to hold that off. There's all these different problems that sin has brought in, and through the sacrifice, the one work of Jesus Christ, he has solved all those problems. He solved them all. And so he tells us there again in verse 12 that he is by that one sacrifice, but this man after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God. Notice in verse number 14 now, for by one offering he hath perfected forever them that are sanctified. Now we've already touched on this theme back in verse number 10. It is through the offering of Jesus Christ that we are sanctified. We are set apart. We are set apart from our sin. We are set apart for heaven. We are set apart in every sense of the word. But in verse 14, there's this extra detail. For by one offering he hath perfected forever. Perfected forever. Now, one writer submits that, if I could put the distinction in my words, sanctification has to do with our end. So right now, to be a Christian means we are set apart or sanctified. The perfection has to do on God's end. There's an interesting psalm and I want to read it because I don't want to butcher it, but back in Psalm 24, I think it might be, 24, 25, the psalmist, in 24 verse 3, Psalms 24 verse 3, the psalmist asks this interesting question, who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord, or who shall stand in his holy place? Now that's a big question. Essentially what the psalmist is saying, who has the right, who is good enough, or who is qualified enough to stand in the presence of God? He actually gives the answer in verse number 4, he that hath clean hands and a pure heart, who hath not lifted up his soul unto vanity, nor sworn deceitfully. Now, the problem with verse 4 is it rules all of us out. None of us have clean hands. And if you do have clean hands, if we're to go a little or apply this a little bit deeper, if you haven't committed any bad things, literally, physically, then the problem is you don't have a pure heart. Now, the irony of it is, if you brag about the fact that you have clean hands, then that bragging comes from pride. And if you have pride, you don't have a pure heart. Therefore, you cannot stand before the presence of God. And so the psalmist with these two verses, he's basically making it known that no one can stand in the presence of God. We are unqualified to stand before God. In every sense of the idea, we cannot stand before the thrice holy God. We are morally corrupt. We are spiritually corrupt. Our affections are unfounded. Everything about us disqualifies us from standing before God. We cannot enter into the presence of God. In fact, if I understand Scripture correctly, if we're to stand before God based on what he told Moses there in the book of Exodus, we would be consumed in that instant by the very nature of who God is and what God is, and by virtue of who we are and what we are, we would be consumed before a thrice holy God. But through the sacrifice of Jesus, the writer is telling us in verse 14, he has perfected, he has prepared them, he has qualified them forever to stand before God. In the book of Esther, we're told there, and I love the book of Esther. I preached through it not too long ago. We're told it's either in chapter 4 or chapter 5, that Esther has to go before the king. And what's interesting and kind of what's said between the lines, we'll not get into all details for the sake of time, but what's in between the lines is that to stand before the king, you had to be qualified, especially as his wife. It was a vain society. I don't take that away from the king, but you had to be beautiful. You had to be presented. You had to have the right clothing. But even with all of that on, you could not approach the king without his permission, which was given by the holding up of the scepter. And so even with all of those things, if you were disqualified from going before the king, you could lose your life in that Persian culture. I'm not saying it was right. I'm simply saying how it was back then. But Esther approaches the king fully qualified, and he accepts her. You understand that the fundamental problem that we have as human beings is that we cannot stand before God, but through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross, he has perfected them forever. Perfected us forever to stand before him. You know, it makes me think of the point being here, it's forever, it is eternal, it will never cease. Before COVID, I had a badge where I could go into any door there at Bourbon Heights. And if you were to get free groceries, you could go in the back door and sneak in. I'm just kidding. But you could go in, as long as you have this badge, you can get in. And after COVID, I think they stopped doing that for the sake of trying to contain sickness and everything else. But with that badge, it was my ticket in, it was my way in. And for as long as it was good, I could get in. Jesus Christ has perfected us forever. He has qualified us forever to stand in the presence of God. I like this because there's a distinction between the perfecting and the sanctifying. We are set apart, but we're not yet ready to go before him. But through Jesus, not only has he set us apart, but he's also qualified us to go before him. It is different now, to my understanding. I guess I could confirm my brother-in-law for this, but at least when Lena was born, understand, as her father, as the husband, I was sanctified, I was set apart to go see my wife and daughter. But in years gone by, you could not go in there until you were scrubbed clean. At least that's how it was when my siblings were born with my dad. They weren't quite that strict when Lena was born, but you had to be clean. You're set apart, but you're not yet qualified. But through Jesus, not only has he set us apart, but he has completely and utterly qualified us to stand before God. To stand before him. Now, I need to bring the sermon to a close, and this is why I want to stop here. In the next section, he gets into he proves this from the Old Testament, which is another interesting thought, but we'll get there. Now, here's the thing about the text today, and here's how I want to apply it to us today. Like the Jews, we know there's something wrong. Like the Jews, we know that we're not good. We don't have to be reminded of that. In fact, when people point out our flaws, that's why we get mad, because we don't want to be reminded of our flaws, right? We just don't like that. We know something's wrong. But here's where we do the same exact thing as the Jews. And this is the problem with fallen man. Like the Jews, we offer up our own sacrifices. Like the Jews, we bring these things before God and we think, man, if I just give this sacrifice, I know this will buy me some time with God. If I just offer this sacrifice, I know that this will appease God for a little while. And we treat our relationship with God like the meter bases in downtown Lexington. Well, if I put another quarter in, I get another 15 minutes, however long. If I put another quarter in, I get another amount of time. If I keep doing this, then surely I will get a little more time with God. And we do that with our own moral sacrifices. How many of us in this room right now, we know we've done wrong. We know we're so far from perfect. Our conscience eats at us day in or day out, maybe week in, week out, I don't know. And we think by going to church, by reading our Bible, by doing this, and ultimately by being sincere, if God knows that if I can repeat being sincere, then God will be somewhat more, but he won't be as mad at me. Like the Jews, while we may not be Jews, like the Jews, we offer our own sacrifices again and again and again and again and again and again and again to never stop. And the truth is, like the Jews, those sacrifices can never take away sin. Like the Jews, the answer to those repeating sacrifices is the gospel. Understand, dear listener, that Jesus has offered one sacrifice forever. You have a golden ticket into heaven. You have the means through which you are qualified, you are set apart, and you can stand before God in every sense of the idea. We can approach the throne of grace anytime because of Jesus. We can talk to God anytime because of Jesus. We can worship God anytime because of Jesus. There's no guilt because the price is paid in full. The debt is paid off. All you have to do is enjoy it. And yet, fallen man goes back and offers yet another sacrifice, another sacrifice, another sacrifice. And that sacrifice can never take away their sin. I find it funny, and not from a Christian or a theological point of view, but there's a distinction between moralism and a relationship. And if you talk to anybody about religion or Christianity or eternal life, when I approach that topic, I try to approach it from a relational point of view. Do you have a relationship with God? But people always respond with, yeah, I need to be in church. I never asked if you needed to be church. I never asked if you're going to church. And yet in fallen man's mind, what is important is just like the Jews, it's the repetition of that sacrifice. And I want to warn all of us, saved and lost alike, if we think that by being here today, we have built up a little bit of credit, then you have a completely flawed view of Christianity. And I say that to Christians and sinners alike. Dear sinner, understand that if by showing up to the service today, by singing the songs, if you think that you've built up some moral credit with God, then you completely misunderstand. Because any moral credit built up with God is still despised by God, because the book of Isaiah tells us that all of our righteousnesses are as filthy rags, so God is not pleased even with our good works. But dear Christian, how often do we do the same thing? Well, I've not really had a good walk with God this week, but I showed up to church today, and surely that's got to count for something. No, it doesn't. Imagine if I treated my wife like that. I take Lauren out on a date, and I say, well, surely this got to count for something. She would slap me and have every right to do so. She would desire that I be there because I want to be there. But if I do that to build up some marriage credit with her, how offensive would that be? And yet we treat God the same exact way. Lord, I'm sorry I've been distant this week, but I'll go to church and I'll even sing out these songs. I guess I'll stay for the afternoon service even. And we think that by repeating those sacrifices, we have, again, built up some kind of credit with God, when that idea is a completely flawed idea of what true biblical Christianity is. True biblical Christianity is Jesus paid it all. He paid it all. There's nothing to worry about. I mean, if I got a platinum ticket and said, you show this ticket to any amusement park, any aquarium in the world, this ticket costs $10 million, but it's yours for free. How foolish are you? I don't want to go enjoy the ticket because I don't know if it's really mine. It's right there in your hands. The Son of God has come. The sacrifice is paid for. It's all finished. It's all accomplished. And yet, how often do we sit back worrying if it's really actually done? And both Christians and sinners alike rob themselves of the blessing of the realization of the truth that Jesus really did pay it all. Bring the sermon to a close. That leaves one of two things for today, but in all areas of life. We will either go home today with the comforting assurance that Jesus has paid it all, or we'll go home today rejecting that premise. Interestingly enough, when it comes to the Christian faith, the question is not whether you're offering enough sacrifices. The question is, do you actually believe Jesus paid it once for all? We, again, have this idea that we have to do more, we have to do more, we have to do more. That's actually not the question. That was really never the question. You know, I mean, that's kind of a foolish thing to keep dwelling on that question. You know what I'm saying? If I don't know, if I wreck Dylan's truck, I'll pick on Dylan, you're here today. If I slam my truck into Dylan's truck, right? And I say, well, Dylan, I'm so sorry, let me repay you. And he says, well, really, I just need another truck. I say, well, I've got a Hot Wheels car. I need another truck. Well, here's another Hot Wheels car. Well, I need another truck. Well, here's a third Hot Wheels car. Surely with like 25 Hot Wheels cars, you can have 5 cars per foot and get to work. 10 cars per foot. My mouth's wrong. But you see what I'm saying? That's not the question. He doesn't want another car, another Hot Wheels car. But if I keep trying to give him a Hot Wheels car, I'm completely ignoring the question, if you will. Similarly, we keep thinking, I got to do more, I got to do more. That's not the question. The question is, do you believe that Jesus paid it once for all? That's why in the book of Habakkuk, God tells Habakkuk, the just shall live by what? By their morality? No. By their good works? Absolutely not. The just shall live by faith. Faith in what? Faith that God will deal with it. Do you believe that Jesus paid it all, or do you not? That's what it boils down to. Because if we leave here, and again, both to Christian and to sinners alike, if we leave here thinking we got to offer another sacrifice, then we're completely missing the point. The question is not, do we need to offer more, or how much more do we have to offer? The question is, do you believe that Jesus really did pay it all? That's the question. For the Jews, they needed to hear this, because for them, the sacrifice was everything. All these years later, dear Christians, the same for us. It is not, do we need to offer more? It is, do we believe Jesus paid it all? Because the bottom line is, he did. I mean, that is confirmed everywhere. There is no doubt at all that he did. But now the question is, do we believe it? What a tragic thing it would be to rob ourselves of blessings if we reject that idea, both Christian and sinners. You know, the illustration's been used before. If after church I'm starving because the peanut butter didn't go far. I'm just kidding. If I'm starving from breakfast, because man, I could really eat. And so there's a religious side of the lady that brought delicious food downstairs. And I say, well, I got to walk to Little Caesars. No, there's food downstairs. The question is not, is there food? The question is, am I going to go partake of the food? The question is not, did Jesus actually provide salvation? The question is, will you believe it? That's what it boils down to. So I simply ask to all of us this morning, dear Christian, in regards to the depth and sweetness of our walk with God, do we really believe it? Do you believe that Jesus really did pay it all, that God's justice and anger is pacified? Or do we as Christians feel like, man, we got to check off another thing on our moral to-do list just to be sure? But similarly, dear sinner, if you're here today and you keep thinking, I've got to do another thing, I'll save you a lot of time and trouble. It's not going to do anything for you. But by simply believing that Jesus paid it all, eternal life can be ours. We are forever sanctified. We're forever perfected. But it goes back to that one thing. We must believe Jesus. Let's all stand.